Hello and welcome back. Today I want to talk about what happens in classrooms when we can see that the children are really making an effort, but their learning just simply doesn't match all the effort that they're putting in. Every year I see the same patterns playing out. Children with different behaviours respond in different ways to an intervention. Of course they do. Every child is unique and brings their own perceptual lens to the classroom as well as the intervention. And yet, certain patterns once seen cannot be unseen. Children with enough enthusiasm to motivate an entire school are selected for intervention, and so are children who are almost inaudible when they speak. There are those children who are challenged when they're asked to sit on a chair and wait for a moment, and those who need reassurance when asked to move from one activity to the next. Sometimes there are labels on these children's learning behaviour, and among those selected for an intervention are the children waiting for an assessment or to be seen by the specialist teacher in the school. When an intervention is inclusive and does not target a particular specific learning difficulty, schools find that they can rely on the professional judgment of their class teachers to target a child for rhythm-based work. I have worked with many children with ECHPs in mainstream and special schools, and I am always asked whether this will work with the children identified with learning differences, and my answer is always the same. You see, when children tell me that they have dyslexia or ADHD or dyspraxia in session 1 and ask me whether they should stay or leave, I tell them to stay, and I also ask them to let me know whether the rhythm-based learning has been helpful or unhelpful in 3 weeks' time. So on this anecdotal basis, I am happy to share that the responses have always been absolutely positive. Teachers have also commented that they have seen rapid progress in these particular students. Are there steps to take to differentiate for these students? Yes, of course. And these are often managed through the seating plan or pacing the sequence of activities in mainstream schools. Whereas in special schools, in this intervention, we actually have 2 special learning trajectories to manage both the moderate and the severe learning difficulties of the students. The effective aspect of learning sets our terrain on its own very own course. We can imagine the steepness of a learning curve, the cliff edge of failure, beyond which there might be no way back. Less dramatic is the constant abrasion that students experience when, despite their best efforts, they slip, they stumble, and they start again. They lose their confidence, they rediscover it, and then begin again, perhaps for the 3rd time that day and every day. They battle through the school in every term and in every year, and they develop an extraordinary level of resilience. And beneath the surface of this struggle, there's often a lot of potential waiting to be recognised. This is not necessarily seen or acknowledged, perhaps because they are also working very hard at just fitting in. But at some point, these children admit defeat. And they submit to that nagging realisation that they're not making progress and that they will always be different. On the one hand, it's a moment of self-awareness. But on the other hand, they are seeking integrity rather than futility. And they may also try to find a new way to fit in or belong, perhaps somewhere else with a new peer group that understands what they've been through. And when I ask the children who've been selected for intervention about their attention, they describe it as scattering or fading, either quickly or gradually. And we also discuss this in terms of how they follow instructions, whether they can remember what they've been asked to do, whether they understand the question. You see, it is very difficult to understand a question when the first half has faded before the second half has been uttered. Children with this challenge want to join in, they want to put their hands up and they want to answer the questions as much as everybody else does. But when their working memory and executive functions give way after 2 or 3 seconds, they are constantly chasing the shadows of sound. When amplitude is pronounced, attention is vibrant, but when amplitude is flat, attention fragments. In the winter, we experience a flattening of our circadian rhythm in response to lower exposure to natural light during the day. And there's an increased reliance on artificial light during the hours of darkness. The mixed messaging for our brains creates a sort of greying out of the circadian rhythm because the beginning and the end of the hours of natural light have become blurred. The amplitude of our alertness peaks in the summer when our circadian rhythm is driven by the hours of daylight, and this happens to a far greater extent. And of course, our reliance on artificial light is minimal. And alertness and attention are very distinct. Alertness reflects our vibrancy and our vitality, and it is actually driven by rising cortisol during the morning, and then it fades as the light dims in the evening. Attention, on the other hand, is much more nuanced. Different contexts, different sounds, different people can capture our attention, and this is largely a socially mediated response. So if our name is called, for example, our attention rapidly rises. The relevance and the salience of that moment would create a steep peak in amplitude. Sitting at the front of a class rather than at the back could also boost the amplitude of a child's attention. And when attention fragments, learning feels harder no matter how much effort is applied. In classrooms, this can look like inconsistency, a child who seems fully engaged one moment and drifts into the next. Recognizing these fluctuations helps teachers see that what looks like inattention may actually be a timing issue, not a motivational one. When attention fades or scatters or fragments, this is almost always because the students are bracing against the unexpected, and any change in the classroom would divert their focus off task. When a child subconsciously prioritizes a bracing mechanism, and I mean a defensive mechanism, their resources are not available for learning despite their best efforts and intentions. The coherence of a signal is something we're all familiar with in our day-to-day communications. Conversations on mobile devices that involve a weak or a glitchy signal are usually abandoned or rescheduled, and the experience is similar in a classroom. When the timing of syllables, words, and phrases does not line up, the meaning is lost. Children with incomplete phonemic awareness learn to compensate for the gaps in their sound perception. They watch faces, they absorb gestures, and they guess the rest just based on context. Classical studies of auditory streaming refer to the cocktail party effect in adult life, and this is when auditory attention splits into different perceptual streams. Incomplete streams are abandoned, whereas when a guest catches their name mentioned across the room, they can hear this more clearly than anything else. Anticipation, which is also known as expectancy, is the key to building an amplitude that is well defined and that will sustain attention across the meaning of an utterance. A child who is fascinated by the ancient Egyptians will hang on a teacher's every word, anticipating the special moment when they will gain a new insight, whereas the child who is new to the topic will be busy absorbing what they can before becoming saturated. Anticipation remains intact for the expert child, and attention is well resourced by the pronounced amplitude of this engaged attitude. Even though the novice child is engaged in principle, the steep rise in cognitive load has the potential to defeat that child with little interest in the topic. Children who are bracing for the unexpected are likely to react to small things all day long. And not only is this interfering with their learning, but this is also a habitual behaviour. It's not even a conscious choice. They're not in a position to choose to change their behaviour either, no matter how hard they might try. Bracing for the unexpected is maladaptive for learning in school. But in a different context, involving, for example, curved balls, they would lead the way. It's not so much that the student's prediction is unreliable, it's just that they're working with a different terrain that we cannot perceive. They may be enculturated to anticipate sounds that just do not belong in the classroom, or perhaps they're not primed to anticipate any sound at all. Indeed, talking may seem as remarkable to them as virtuosic musicianship would to most people. A child who arrives in school with the belief that talking is only for adults may struggle not only with speech but also with the timing of conversational turns, that give and take. This flatness, in terms of the amplitude of expectancy and anticipation, would likely ripple out across all areas of their social development. So, as education becomes increasingly inclusive, teachers are required to differentiate to a larger extent. Every child's needs are unique and range from visible sensory differences and physical disabilities to the invisible, perceptual and cognitive differences. The dimension of time is rarely mentioned in books about reading and learning, even though rhythm and meter are fundamental to the structure of every utterance. And yet, whilst bypassing the potential to address rhythm and learning, extra time is sprinkled like confetti, as this is a convenient way to appear to meet students' needs. But if students are not oriented within the lesson, the text or the conversation, having more time will not really help them. So what will? Imagine that you are able to hold 3 syllables in your mind at any given moment. Everything that is said around you fades before you've consolidated it into a unit of meaning. Imagine the information was transcribed for you. With so much to read, this would be absolutely overwhelming and unsustainable, leading to overload and burnout. So it's unsurprising that students affected by limited capacity and working memory feel that they do not fit in, that school is not for them, and become disaffected eventually. This is not a reflection of their intelligence. In fact, where there is a marked discrepancy between their intelligence quotient and their working memory capacity, the risk of disaffection can be far greater because frustration levels become problematic earlier on in childhood. When I share audio clips from my PhD research with head teachers and they can hear the changes in children's reading for themselves, they often notice their own change in response to this child. The remark that stays with me is this: that is now a child with potential. And the question that I ponder is this: had this child always had that potential, or had the enrichment, in other words, the intervention that he or she received at school, unleashed new potential? The intervention was actually very short. Some might say too short for such a large effect. So we're looking at multiple years of progress in reading accuracy and comprehension. And for me, the children who are targeted for intervention by their class teachers have always had that potential within them, but they had not always had access to a specific form of enrichment that they needed. So in everything that we do, from kicking a ball around the yard to listening to the waves on the beach, the dimension of time plays a role in how we relate to our environment. In classrooms, teachers know which children can follow the lesson, those who need help in processing what's going on around them. We know that neuroplasticity reshapes our responses to the environment and the timing of everything around us. From a question like, is it time for lunch yet, to I can't wait to turn the next page, we are always ready to respond and to anticipate to what is coming up next. And moments like these remind us that potential is not created but revealed. When we shift our lens from managing behaviour to understanding timing, we actually begin to see learning in a new way, one that observes how each child anticipates, processes, and responds. When leaders recognise timing as a hidden dimension of learning, they're better able to discern between issues that overlap, particularly those concerning behaviour and access. Thank you so much for joining me again today. Bye for now.